Hi everybody, good evening. Welcome to the webinar. Tonight is part 2 in our review of Parenting from the Inside Out by Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell. I split it up because there's such rich content in this book, and like I've said before, the feedback that I've received about this book, because it is one of my favorite books on parenting that we've had written in the last many years, is that it can be quite technical. And so some people said they benefited from watching the webinar and it gave them a better understanding of the book. So this could be something you watch before or after you read the book. And I hope it's helpful in that way. I'll take some of the research studies out of it, but I'm not going to get into all the technical research study. But they do a great job in this book of presenting the research and the data along with practical applications and stories set next to it, sometimes on the same page. So here, let's start with the main premise for tonight. Reflecting on your childhood experiences can help you make sense of your life. Since the events of your childhood can't be altered, why is such reflection helpful? A deeper self-understanding changes who you are. Making sense of your life enables you to understand others more fully and gives you the possibility of choosing your behaviors and opening your mind to a fuller range of experiences. The changes that come with self-understanding enable you to have a way of being, a way of communicating with your children that promotes their security of attachment. That's a mouthful, but that might be the most important thing that we can say about this. And part of the challenge for families is that when we start to do work around parenting and family dynamics, when they have a child that's in trouble, they go to a shame and blame place, right? They go to this place and they want to be a good parent. It's important for them to be a good parent. So they want to collect information that reinforces that. This isn't saying that you're a bad parent. This is saying that there are dynamics in a family, and that those dynamics are oftentimes unconscious, and that those can be some of the most non-helpful parts of our parenting, of our relationship. So becoming more conscious, becoming more aware, realizing, I'll say by the end tonight, the most important thing is to realize is that you have some work. I told the story from a Chicago parent meeting years ago, or a year ago, where after talking about some principles, one of the parents said, so you're saying that some of the struggles that we're having in parenting come because of our own childhood issues? And I couldn't help but laugh and say, I'm saying it's almost all of them are stem from that. And remember, your issues are not your child's issues. Their issues are their issues. But this work that they're describing here helps you become more clear about that. When you know your work, or have a strong sense of it, then you can begin to separate out and making, there's very intentional language in this paragraph because they talk about being able to choose your behaviors. And a lot of times we're just reacting. We're reacting to small trauma, big trauma, issues that we're unconscious for. So making sense out of your life is an important thing, realizing that you have work to do. The adult attachment interview. This is a measurement, a study, where we're going to talk about how they were able to predict attachment. And this is an interview where you tell your own story. The AAI, in which parents are asked about their recollections of their own childhoods. As it turns out, the way parents made sense of their own early life experiences, as revealed in the coherence of their life narrative, as told to an interviewer, is the most powerful feature that can predict the child's security of attachment. Adult attachment can be determined by how parents tell the story of their early life history to another adult. They had, with almost 80% accuracy, they could interview pregnant mothers and fathers that were the fathers of these children. They could interview them. And they could predict, with an 80% accuracy, the style or the quality of attachment at 2 years of age. That's for the social sciences, that is a mind-blowing statistic that they're able to predict that. I mean, we feel pretty good about when we're predicting in the 40%. We feel great about that. 80% accuracy is amazing. So the research is there. This was done at UCLA and done in other places. The research is there. This is not a kind of a fringe idea that we're talking about. That's why at Evoke we spend so much time and energy trying to get you on your journey and get you off your child's journey. And I know there's some confusion about what we mean about that, but just that you have work to do is the important thing. The AAI consists of about 20 questions that require the subject to search for autobiographical memories while being interviewed by researchers. They found that these interviews allowed them to predict the interview subject's child's form of attachment to the subject with around 85% accuracy. In later projects, couples were interviewed and predictions were made regarding the yet-to-be-born child's attachment to each parent at 1 year of age. Again, correlations with the predictions made on the basis of the AAI data were high. The AAI clearly taps into some powerful aspects of parents' minds that directly influences their relationship with their children. So there's the data right there. Those are the more specifics that I was just mentioning before. This is a powerful piece of information for us. This is to be able to see that we can predict at that level tells us that this is an important variable for us and we can't dismiss it. It's not psychobabble, mumbo jumbo. It's not a fringe opinion. And they talk about this idea of earned secure attachment, right? This is where the hope comes in for all of us, for our own family growing up, and also for all of us as it relates to the children that we're raising. After all, memory is subjective. Why would a subjective accounting have such predictive power? More important is how the narrative is told, how it reveals the way the individual has made sense of life as reflected in how he or she is able to integrate the various forms of memory into a coherent whole. One exciting aspect of the AA research is that the earned secure attachment category, in which described events appear to be very difficult, but the person has come to make sense of his or her life and can offer a coherent telling of the life story. The assessment of the interview is primarily based on the evaluation of the coherence of the story, not on the accuracy of its content. So there's a whole bunch of hopeful stuff in that, right? And the most important, it's not the quality of the childhood. It's not even the accuracy of the report. It just shows how the person is thinking, how the parent is thinking in the process. And so that old idea that we talk about in therapy, where we say, if it's your truth, that's the only thing that is important, there's a part of that that's in this, right? And if your truth is more clear, more coherent, more complex, right? If it's that way, you're going to have a better capacity to be able to be there for your child. That means that somebody with this quality of a childhood could actually be a less effective parent than somebody with this quality, much lower, right? Because they've made sense out of it. And that's hopeful for us, but it's also hopeful for our children because it says that for them, that no matter how well we did or didn't do, that they have the capacity to grow up in spite of us sometimes. And I think that's important for us to know because it releases us of the paralyzing guilt that some of us feel when we make mistakes and we know that we do. So I like to say that sometimes our children grow up to be healthy adults in spite of us, not always because of us. Here again, the importance of the AAI is that it is not what happened to an individual by itself that matters. It is how that person has come to process those events. The italics and bold, of course, are added by me. Having some supportive connection with another person may help to make sense of a difficult experiences in the home. This is the research of my dissertation, and it also is supported here. We get asked so much, and I think a lot of parents wonder about resiliency, right? Why do some bad things happen to children and they develop symptomology around it, and some bad things happen to other children and they develop less symptomology around it? One of the mitigating factors is if they had somebody in their life that they felt understood them, that connected to them. Not somebody that was smart, not somebody that was good, but somebody that could see them. That's why our communication skills training that we do at Evoke, that's why the webinar on containing that I've done, is so important. That's why I spend so much time and energy trying to help parents let go of the paralyzing fear and guilt and shame to be able to look at themselves. Right? That's why I share so much of my imperfections, my own mistakes, my own foibles, so that you know that it's safe. That I'm not coming down to you on high. I'm not blaming you in this simple way. I'm saying it's okay. It's to be human. You don't have to beat yourself up. And even though that was how most of us were raised, that's why we have that, right? That guilt didn't come from us. That shame and fear didn't come from us. It came from our context that told us that when we were anything but good, that we were not okay and that we might be rejected and that those were moral failings and likely to lead to us being rejected or abandoned. That's why all of that is there. That's where that comes from. So part of my process with you all, part of my book, part of what we try to teach at Evoke is to make it safe for you. We're all human. And when you can do that, you can much more capably connect and see your children. When your fear and anxiety can be held at bay, when their mistakes or anger isn't about you, right? These are all aspects of this. When their fear and anger is about them and you can see them, and you can hear it without going to a dark place or a justifying or a defensive place or a counter-attacking place. When all of those things can be improved upon, you can see them. And then you're providing them with an important piece of resilience. That's what the research, their research showed, and that's what my research showed for my dissertation. He talks about Daniel Siegel is an expert brain researcher, brain teacher. I've talked about his book Brainstorming before, and I think the other one's called The Whole Brain Child. These are great books for you all to read if you want to go more into the science of it, and some people really like that stuff. So we're talking about the high road. This is the prefrontal cortex. This is the highest part of the brain. The low road is the primitive brain. That's the brain that came on board first when we were developing, sometimes called the reptilian brain. That's the brain that keeps us alive and has our fight and flight responses, right? So the higher and more forward you go to the brain, the more its intellectual capacity, right? The ability to anticipate consequences, to keep at bay the fight or flight that we might experience and to make a decision that's not reactive, to be able to make a choice. So in the high road, this is the part of the brain that is not fight or flight trauma response brain, a form of processing information that involves the higher rational reflective thought processes of the mind. High road processing allows for mindfulness, flexibility in our responses, and an integrating sense of self-awareness. The high road involves the prefrontal cortex in its processes. The low mode processing involves the shutting down of higher processes of the mind and leaves the individual in a state of intense emotions, impulsive reactions, rigid and repetitive responses, and lacking in self-reflection and the consideration of another's point of view. Involvement of the prefrontal cortex is shut off when one is on the low road. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to develop with your children. We're doing this. And their prefrontal cortex doesn't come until around 25. So we're doing it with them. We're doing it with you, where we're trying to develop it. We're trying to create pathways from your fear and anxiety response up to that area. But when you find yourself, and we all do, when you find yourself panicking, reacting, being terrified in situations that later on you realize didn't necessarily on their own merits deserve that response, then you know you're having this kind of response. Now, if you're being chased by a bear, if a car is about to come up on the sidewalk and hit you, that's why the low road says, stop thinking, get out of here as fast as possible. Like, we just solved the problem. All of your energy goes toward survival at that point. But this is more than survival. And I think for parents, a lot of times they've experienced a lot of trauma with their children. They bring their own trauma into it. Then their children do things that are life-threatening, right? That's true for many of you. Not all of you, but many of you. And so then that trauma is triggered, and we lose access to the high road. And we stay circling down in that spot. And that gets in the way of some of the important parenting work, tools, techniques that will help you to be more effective as a parent. These intense emotions can lead you to have knee-jerk reactions instead of thoughtful responses. Excuse me. When you are feeling stressed or find yourself in situations with your child that trigger past unresolved issues, your mind may shut off and become inflexible. No parents really feel good about themselves or what they may have done to their child in this low road state of mind. And yet when parents have not reflected on their own experiences, they can return again and again into the low road. So if we don't learn, again, it goes back to it, if we don't learn to process our own early life trauma, then we are less capable of doing this. And that's why I believe in therapy so much. I believe in going to it as a therapist, as a father, as a husband. And I'm constantly evolving. I don't think of therapy for myself as a jail sentence. I don't think of it really as work. I call it work, but it's more a place to be fed, a place to be safe, a place to learn about myself, a place to process what's going on in my daily life with my clients, the people that I work with my family, with my wife. right? So that's my perspective on it. And I think a lot of people feel threatened by that process, by this process that we're being asked to do, because we're so conditioned to think about good and bad, right? Rejectable and acceptable. So doing your own work. I want to say something about trauma. There's big T trauma, which is something that would be like being molested, being attacked, right? Getting in a car accident, drug overdose. Those are all big T traumas, right? Alcoholic parent coming and beating you or yelling at you. Those are big T traumas. Some of us have big T traumas. Some of your children have big T traumas, and they talk about those. So those are the usual suspects, if you will, that we look at in therapy to say, this is going to have an impact. This is going to leave a mark. And we've got to do work around it. Got to tell that story. And to unfold big T trauma, they ask you to tell the story over an amazing amount of times in therapy to work through big T trauma. Okay? Small T trauma is, anything less than ideal. That's the best definition of trauma. Anything less than ideal. And of course, if it's just barely less than ideal, then it's little T trauma, tiny T trauma. But it's something that makes us feel unsafe, something that hurts, something that scares us, something that embarrasses us, right? And so we don't get to decide as parents what our children's trauma is. We don't get to decide how big it is or small it is. We want to, for various reasons, but we don't get to. The person gets to decide themselves. And as a therapist, that's why you don't really debate it. And parents are worried that they'll use that as an excuse. We don't let that happen either. You don't need an excuse. You're just struggling. And you get to make sense out of it. And so that's what this process is about, is getting people to look at all their trauma, big T, little t, anything less than ideal, any hurt. High road, more about the high road. The high road mode, the high mode of processing uses the part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. When processing on the high road, we're able to involve the rational, reflective thought process of the mind. This is a little bit repetitive. This supports our ability to reflect on possibilities and consider our choice of action and its consequences. The high road allows us to make flexible choices that support our values in raising our children. This doesn't mean that there won't be conflict or other children will never be upset or unhappy. It does mean that we can choose how we respond to their behavior. There's this great story in there in the book where Dr. Siegel talks about an early medical rotation where he worked in pediatric trauma unit. And he talked about having to work on young infants who had physical trauma and had to hold them down and to save their lives, and the screaming and the crying, and how he had to cut off part of himself. And then he found out when he had his own children years later that when his children would cry for anything, he had this frozen, terrified experience. It took him a long time to figure out that that's where it came from. That's what it reminded him. That's what it triggered for him. And that's a pretty conscious, obvious, concrete example. And ours are usually much, much more subtle than that. Lessons like anger wasn't okay, and uncomfortable feelings weren't okay, and there was something to be fixed, right? Those are examples of more common family dynamics. And so when our children are upset or angry, we look at it sometimes as a betrayal. We look at it as sometimes disrespect, instead of they're injured and they don't have the skills and the resources to do it. And so we have our own reactions around that. Let's talk about where shame comes into their equation. Shame prevents us from engaging in any repair process with our children after low road interactions. He was able to transcend the feelings of guilt and shame that had previously kept him from reflecting on the issues that may be the root of his harsh and aggressive behavior towards his child. With this new framework, he began to work in therapy toward healing the past. Start with the assumption that you and your parents have done the best you can under the circumstances of your life. Instead of placing blame or judgment, be gentle with yourself. Shame is not the solution. And I talk about that as much as I talk about anything. Shame is the problem. Shame is a part of the problem. And if we can't look at our humanness because of what that means, because of the fears of people using it against us. Most parents think of it that way. Many parents think of it that way, I should say. then we're not going to be able to look at our stuff. I was talking to somebody just recently about this idea about writing a letter of accountability to their child. Not everything, but some specific things. And the parent said, I'm afraid that he's going to use it against us. And I said, it doesn't matter. If he does, that's about him, and you don't have to take it. It's your fear that when he does use it against you, that you'll crumble, that is the problem. But if I put something out there, if I make an amends, if I acknowledge my participation in this dance and use that as an excuse, my response is, okay, if you want to do that, you can. I'm really, really sorry. I'm just here to be accountable and make amends for what I've done. So shame is going to get in the way for parents. It does get in the way for parents. And I was coaching a parent just the other day. When your child or when your co-parent or when somebody critiques your parenting, pile on with them. Not in a victim kind of passive-aggressive way, but say, oh my gosh, I struggle with that so much. And when I hear a parent telling me how good they are, what I hear is that they feel like they've been criticized, that they feel like they haven't been acknowledged for the good that they've done. So when I hear a client that I'm working with on the phone, a parent, and they start talking about how good they are, I'll often pause and say, it sounds like maybe you're feeling like you need to tell me this, that I don't know it. I don't even have the inkling to judge you as a good or a bad parent. I really don't. And maybe in my weak moments, if I do, it's pretty quick for me to turn back to myself and say, but you make mistakes, similar, sometimes worse, sometimes different than those. So it's really important that you work on the shame and find out where the shame came from, because it came from somewhere. You weren't born with it. It's important to take responsibility for our actions, but not to condemn ourselves because we are not able to act in some idealized manner or because we are not further along in our own developmental process. We, just like our children, are doing the best we can at the point in time, and like them, we are learning more respectful ways to communicate. As parents learn to balance their own emotions without swinging between feelings of guilt and feelings of anger toward their child, they are better able to give their child both nurture and structure. I've said it this way, and this is probably the most dramatic way that I can say it. When a human being, a parent, is frustrated and angry with their child, they have lost connection with them. Right? If I could see you, if I had the capacity, and then we all don't have this, not limitless, if I had the capacity to see the intent of your heart, the fears, the hurt, the wound, how this defense or this behavior, this acting out was related to the wound, it would be almost impossible to be angry with you. I might be sad, I might be worried, I might be heartbroken, but anger and frustration is, I don't want to sell it absolutely, but I want to say I feel pretty strongly in my life that when I get angry with somebody, I've lost connection with them. I've lost my empathic capacity at that time. For whatever reason. Maybe it is because I'm so hurt. That's usually what it is, or because I'm so scared. So that's a little bit of a detour, but it's that second bullet point. Learning to balance our emotions without swinging between feelings of guilt and feelings of anger toward our child, better able to provide them nurturing and structure. Developing a reflective process. A parent can help a child make sense of his experiences by telling the story of the events from the perspective of the child's experience. This is the capacity to be able to look into the child and imagine. That's why one of my favorite assignments is write an impact letter from your child to you. Right? Imagine how hard it is. I hope everybody on this list knows that it's hard to live with you sometimes. For me, it's hard to live with me a lot of the time. And being able and practicing and saying, what must it be like to have Brad be your dad to all four of my children? And sometimes I'm surprised by the things that they say to me that it's hard. And a lot of it, I get so learning to understand that, learning to imagine it. When you retell the story, be sure to focus on your child's feelings, not your own feelings, or the way you would like your child to feel. And again, because of our own wounds, we want to talk about ours. Right? We want to be understood. We came away from our childhood with some unfinished business. Our parents struggled to see us. They might have been nice people, kind people, loving people, but they missed us sometimes. And so that wound carried forward into adulthood prevents us from being able to do this really well. Reflection is often suspended when we are on the low road. Our instinctual survival responses to fight, flee, or freeze may become activated on the low road and dominate our behavior. Let's talk about boundaries and connection. I'm kind of hopping from some of the major points, and so when you read through it, you'll read the stories and the research, but I'm hopping to some of the main points that they teach in the book. You can empathize and reflect back to your child the essence of her desire without actually fulfilling her wish. I'm going to read that one again because it's so important. You can empathize and reflect back to your child the essence of her desire without actually fulfilling her wish. Such a core, important parenting concept, idea, and skill. Many times, empathic and reflective comments can help your child move on past his frustration at not getting what he wanted. However, even if the parent offers the most supportive response, the child may still feel upset and adamant about his desire no matter what you say or do. That's important, because if you're just empathizing to get them to feel something, if you're just empathizing to get them to get over it, and you're not letting go, they'll sense that. They'll sense that you're just in a more sophisticated way trying to control how they feel and get their feelings to go away. And so letting them be upset. That's why a lot of children will say in the program that it's one of the freest places that they've ever felt, even though the structure was there, that it was one of the free and easiest places, because we learn as treatment professionals, and we're not your parents. I mean, we're not their parents. So we learn as treatment professionals to let them be angry at us. And we have that advantage of not having as much attachment to that as you, because it doesn't mean anything about us. And for you, it means something about you, right? We need our children, we like our children to like us, because then that means we're good parents. And I know intellectually most of us would say, no, I don't. I would challenge that. And a lot of you, I don't know all of you and all your situations, but I would challenge that from the work that I've done with parents over the 20 years I've been doing this. Allowing your child to have his distress without trying to punish him or indulge him can offer him the opportunity to learn how to tolerate his own emotional discomfort. You do not have to fix the situation by giving in or trying to get rid of his uncomfortable feelings. Repairing and reflection. An important aspect of repair is to acknowledge our own role in this disrupted connection. It is important to respect his or her sense of timing as well as your own. Some parents may hate their own vulnerability or emotional needs for connection and project that hatred onto their child via intense rage at the child's behavior. In this way, a parent's leftover issues may block the repair process. And that's what I was describing a moment ago. Parenting, and I like to talk about ideals, because then we realize what is our work. Our work is to get there, right? To work toward that, even though we may never accomplish any of these ideals. But ideally, this is not about what they give to us. This is not about them loving us. This is not about them liking us, ideally. This is about us loving them, liking them and being there for them. And that's why sometimes their rejection of us, and we don't want to own the vulnerability, the need. We have this unfinished business. It's so upsetting to us. I talked about this the other day. You know the movie Inside Out? The one that was the cartoon that won Best Picture with the inside head. And there's that one critical scene where the daughter gets upset. And that's because she's gone through something traumatic with friends and moving recently. And the parent's interpretation of it is she's being disrespectful. And that wasn't the thing at all. But they couldn't see it because they had this filter, this sensibility that they're describing here. They didn't know they had it. If they knew they had it, then they could say, this is my thing, I can manage this, I need her to like me. That's the parent that's healthier, right? The parent that doesn't think that they have it, the parent that knows that they have it and can face it. That's why when a parent says I was a pretty good parent, I look to, again, you're feeling criticized, but I also think, ooh, that's scary to me. That's more frightening to me than the parent that says, man, I am bumbling through this parenting thing like you wouldn't believe. My thought is, oh, your child is so lucky. Your child is so lucky. The lecture trap. Of course, I probably know nothing about this, right? It is not necessary or even helpful to verbally reason with our children all the time. If we only value the logical mind, we'll get into the endless arguments and negotiations, and our children will think that if they make a reasonable argument, we should always act according to their wishes. Sometimes it's okay to say, no, that's just not okay with me. Or I understand how you feel, but I'm not going to change my mind. We don't have to explain all of our decisions or give a reason for everything we do and expect our children to readily agree with us. That last phrase is the most important part. We're trying to get buy-in so we don't have to set a boundary. We're trying to get them to agree with us so we don't have to set a boundary. We want them to want it so we don't have to do the frightening thing of setting a boundary and risk being rejected by them, which is its own irony, right? That we're worried about being rejected by our children. That's a wound that came from our childhood. So learning to say no. And learning, and I hope this comes across tonight, learning that if you're not doing this stuff, it's okay. That's what this is about. Everything that I'm talking about tonight, I know about intimately. Every one of these things. That's why I know this stuff. Not because I studied more than the other therapists, not because I read more. I know this stuff because I've been working at it in my therapy. I've been working at seeing my own stuff. And so it's easy to see it in others. And it took a lot of years of work, a lot of practice, sometimes some really, really painful stuff to see it. Mindsight, the ability to see what another feels, thinks, and intends. Mindsight, this is his phrase, mindsight is the ability to perceive the internal experience of another person and make sense of that imagined experience, enabling us to offer compassionate responses that reflect our understanding. And we develop mindsight as we do our own, right? The more I do my own work, the more I can recognize it in you. That's what happens. The more I tell my story, the more I practice on peeling the layers off of my own personal onion, the more capable I'm going to be of seeing you, and in the case of the parent, seeing the child. Be intentional and mindful is a good place to start. That's why more important than any question is why. Why do you want to do that? Not what are you doing, not what are you deciding with your child if you're going to set this boundary, but why? Why do you want to take them home after a vote? Why do you want them to come home on week 7 instead of week 8? Let's talk about that. And then learning to be mindful, which means learning to be present with yourself, what you're feeling and what you're thinking and what you're believing. That's why therapy is a kind of mindfulness. Having compassionate self-understanding. You know, I say this to my students all the time. Please don't go from problem behavior to behavior change too quickly. Please. And they say so much of the time when they get found out or something comes up, I got to stop that. I hear clients say that every session. Every session I hear a client say that. I've got to stop that. And my response is slow down. First, understand it. If you just go to behavior change, you might miss an opportunity to understand the deeper process that's really occurring for you. So, and what that requires is self-compassion, right? It requires you to say, I got to be kind to myself, because that behavior change is oftentimes just fueled by shame, right? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. I got to fix this. I should be this other way. Reflective conversations that we were describing earlier relate to this mindset. When we can have these kinds of discussions more with our children, we can develop better mindset, and so can they. Reflective dialogues are conversations with others that reflect on the internal processes of the mind. Reflective dialogues focus on processes as thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, memories, beliefs, attitude, and intentions. That's really what's going on in our program. All day long, 14 hours a day. If parents focus only on their child's behavior and do not consider the mental processes that motivate that behavior, they often end up parenting for short-term results and do not help their children learn about themselves. They react quickly and do whatever will make their children or themselves less distressed in the moment. We call this any port in the storm kind of parenting. The chapter heading of my book on changing behavior in children says that, right? It says, before we launch into trying to change a behavior, please let's take a moment and listen to what that behavior could be telling us. All of your children's behavior, if we can learn to listen better, learn to reflect that back to them, learn to help them discover it, becomes much more important than the grade they get in school, the problems they got into, right? Because this is about them learning how to grow up, learning who they are, learning what's going on. And so we can become a part of facilitating that process by having these kinds of discussions, asking these kinds of questions, and not moving always so quickly to behavior change. The great thing about this is it comes from research on early development. It wasn't for troubled teens, but it has its application. I like it because it's scientific. And I think that a lot of what we talk about from an intuitive or maybe even a philosophical model. And I think it's wonderful. And it's happening so much. Our science is catching up with our intuition in so many areas. It's wonderful. What we know about the brain is telling us things that we've known for a long time about the psyche. It's not simple cause and effect, right? It's more complex. It's more systemic. Good enough parenting is this idea that you don't have to be perfect, right? Good enough means that you can facilitate a process that's good enough. It's a Melanie Klein idea, who's a early developmental childhood psychologist. So good enough parenting means you don't have to be perfect. Your children don't need you to be perfect. If they need you to be great or perfect, that's your need. If they needed you to be great or perfect, they're in trouble. They just need you to be good enough and to be trying. What they need you to do is to be humble and to look at yourself. They need you for you to not need to be good or great. It goes from the abstract and conceptual. I found the exercises in here were a little bit elementary. That would be my critique of it. And sometimes it can be, the practicality was missing of it sometimes. So those would be my critiques about it. Let me take it home. Know your story. Heal your wounds. Make that your lifelong journey. Begin to learn how your stuff affects parenting. That's important. Processing and healing your trauma, big T and little t, develops prefrontal cortex functioning. The unknown and the unprocessed is the most damaging stuff for us. The unexplored. Do your work. First, you have to know that you have some work. I'm going to tell the story of the dad. I like this paragraph. The dad who was a bad listener, who thought he was a good one, who learned to listen and realized he wasn't very good at it. I've told the story before about a father who his son accused him of not listening, not being a good listener, never being heard, understood by his father. And his father said, I'm a great listener. Week 1, week 2, I'm a great listener. He's just using that as an excuse, right? That's his excuse for his problems, his choices. And then about week 5 or 6 after the dad did some of his work with us, he said, gosh, I realized what a poor listener I was. And I realized how I'm not good at it, given these new skills. And I said, you're so much better at it now. But when he thought he was good, he was horrible. And when he knew he wasn't good, he was better than most. Because he knew that. And he could change it, and he could work on it, and he could stumble and get up again. Abraham Tversky, in the book, Addictive Thinking, great book. We use it in our program a lot. Talks about that the excuses that family members of the identified patient have for not going into treatment themselves, for not going to Al-Anon, for not going to CODA, are the exact same excuses that the addict has, or the identified patient. I don't have a problem. These people are not like me. I can fix it on my own. Right? I can go down the list. And it's a beautiful illustration in this book because if nothing else, going to the 6 Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous meetings that we ask you to go to, going to an intensive, going to the workshop, we want all parents to go to the workshop, doing some of this stuff. If nothing else, you begin to have empathy for the difficult things that you're asking your children to do. And sometimes we play confused about why our children aren't getting better. It seems to us, from our limited, unempathic point of view, that, gosh, shouldn't they want to get better? They're miserable. They're unhealthy. Shouldn't they want to get better? Doing some of the things that you're asked to do. Those who attend the webinars, I assume you're in that arena already. It gives you at least empathy about how hard it is. Very, very similar. Very similar. Empathy responds to my capacity to connect with another person about how they're feeling specifically. Mindsight is a more global idea, but great question. Empathy is a part of mindsight. Mindsight will improve your empathy, so they're almost synonymous with each other. Mindsight is a more technical term, more comprehensive. Empathy, the most shortest definition of empathy is to be with somebody in their pain or discomfort or feelings. To be with them, to be connected. All right, no other questions have come in. I'll go over some of our upcoming events, and Here's our intensives and workshops. We want all parents that are in the program to go to the workshop if they possibly can. Those are the upcoming dates and the address. If you can come to, we have an upcoming individual intensive. We still have a few spots in that if you want to come to that. That's where those are the ones that I run, and we do deep personal work. The only qualification is you have to believe that you have work to do. And then Heroic Journeys is our multifamily group that we're going to do in May. Upcoming support groups, we have one in Chicago and New York on the schedule. Same night, actually. And then we have Northern Southern California. I'll put that on the schedule in May soon. Email Stephanie@devoketherapy.com to RSVP. Pursuits is our adventure trip. That's for sober fun. That can be for families. That can be for young adults. So you can schedule those trips. We want all families to go to these 12-step support groups. 6 while you're with us. If you didn't finish it and you're already out of there, go to 6. Follow us on social media. You'll hear more about the upcoming Wilderness Play that's going to start in New York City on October 24th. It will premiere and then tour the country. So you'll hear about things like that and the progress. Here's the book. It's on paperback now, also available audio. You can go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page to look at all the books that are recommended by therapists. Not all of them, but many of them. And if you buy it there, part of the money goes to help people that can't afford treatment. Any other questions before we wrap up tonight, Michael? I try to talk slow. All right, folks. Next webinar will be Monday, March 28th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time, Grief and Loss. So I look forward to talking to you then. I hope these webinars are helpful touch points for you. Hope they help you feel more connected. Hope they're supportive. Hope they're encouraging. Hope they help you to remove some of the guilt, fear, and shame that you have instead of add any to it. And I hope they're encouraging. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you Monday night. Bye-bye.